Some moments in life are like hairline fractures in a porcelain vase. You don't see them at first. You might even run your finger over the surface and feel nothing but smoothness. But the damage is done. The structural integrity is gone. It's only a matter of time before the whole thing shatters. For me, that moment came on a perfectly ordinary Sunday in October 2023. The air in our Columbus, Ohio home was thick with the rich, comforting scent of my husband David's famous lasagna. It was his signature dish, the one he made for every special occasion, or sometimes just because it was Sunday. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings of our dining room. Our son, Liam, was telling a story about his work, his hands moving animatedly. And his wife, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, was glowing. She always seemed to glow, a perpetual spotlight following her around. She was beautiful, charismatic, and since she married our son 2 years prior, she had become the center of our family's solar system. I was the quiet planet, content in my distant orbit, watching the star burn brightly. David, my husband of 35 years, sat at the head of the table. He was my oak. Strong, steady, his presence a comforting weight. He caught my eye from across the table and gave me a small, private smile. It was a smile I'd known my whole adult life, a silent conversation that said, "Look at this. Look at what we built. A beautiful home, a successful son, a family gathered." It was everything we'd ever worked for. It was perfect, dangerously perfect. As Liam finished his story to a round of chuckles, Chloe leaned in towards me. The scent of her expensive perfume, something floral and sharp, cut through the aroma of garlic bread. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch surprisingly cold. Her perfectly manicured nails were painted a deep blood red. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial breath against my ear, her smile never faltering for the rest of the table. "I have some wonderful news. We haven't told anyone yet, but I wanted you to be the first to know." I smiled back, a genuine warm smile. "Oh, Chloe, that's wonderful. What is it?" I expected her to say she got a promotion, or that they were finally adopting the golden retriever she'd been talking about for months. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were like chips of ice, holding a glint of something I couldn't, or maybe didn't want to, decipher. She leaned closer still, her lips almost touching my earlobe, and then she delivered the line that fractured my world. "I'm pregnant," she breathed. And then, before I could even process the joy of becoming a grandmother, she added the final devastating words. "And it's David's baby. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. The world didn't just stop, it fractured. The cheerful chatter of my family faded into a dull, roaring sound in my ears. The fork in my hand, laden with cheesy lasagna, felt impossibly heavy. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold tide pulling away from my skin. My gaze flickered past Chloe's perfectly coiffed blonde hair to my husband. He was laughing at something Liam said, completely oblivious. My oak, my steady, reliable David. The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly unthinkable, that for a split second I thought I must have misheard. But then I looked back at Chloe. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the look of a predator that had just successfully cornered its prey. She knew I'd heard her correctly, and she knew the power of the poison she had just injected directly into my heart. My training as an emergency room nurse, a career I'd left a decade ago, kicked in. Triage, assess the situation, control the bleeding, don't show panic. Panic is contagious. If I screamed, if I threw my plate, if I so much as let a single tear fall, this family dinner, this family itself, would detonate. Chloe was holding the detonator, and she was daring me to press it, so I did the only thing I could. I pulled back slowly, a carefully constructed mask of grandmotherly delight sliding into place over my features. I squeezed her arm gently. "Oh, Chloe, I said, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. I made myself meet her gaze, forcing my eyes to convey warmth I didn't feel. A baby, that's the most wonderful news. I let the ambiguity hang in the air. A baby. I didn't acknowledge the second part of her whisper. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the wound. I compartmentalized it, shoved it into a lead-lined box in the back of my mind, and slammed the door shut. For the rest of the dinner, I was the perfect mother-in-law. I asked about due dates, about cravings, about whether they thought it would be a boy or a girl. I smiled, I laughed. I passed the salad, and with every passing moment, with every fake smile I offered, I could feel Chloe watching me, waiting for me to crack. But I wouldn't, not here, not on her terms. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I remember cleaning the kitchen on autopilot, David humming beside me as he scraped the plates, completely unaware of the cataclysm that had just occurred in my soul. "Wasn't that a nice evening?" he asked, wrapping an arm around my waist. Chloe seemed so happy. Yes, I managed to choke out. So happy. He kissed my temple and went upstairs to watch TV. I stood in the silent kitchen for a long time, my hands gripping the edge of the cold granite countertop until my knuckles were white. The lead-lined box in my mind was rattling, the thing inside desperate to get out. I took a deep, shuddering breath and walked to the back door, stepping out into the crisp October air. The Ohio sky was a deep, starless black. The air was cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, finally allowing the first tremor to run through my body. The words echoed in the silence of the garden. "It's David's baby." It was a lie. It had to be a lie. David and I had our issues, like any couple married for over 3 decades. There were periods of distance, quiet disagreements, nights spent on opposite sides of the bed, but infidelity, betrayal on this level, it seemed impossible. David was a good man, an honorable man, wasn't he? But Chloe, why would she say it if it wasn't true? It was a bizarre, cruel, and self-destructive lie to tell. Unless it wasn't a lie, unless it was the truth, and she was telling me as a power move, a way to establish her new position in the family hierarchy. To let me know that I was being replaced, not just as the central woman in my son's life, but in my husband's as well. The thought was a physical blow. I leaned against the cold brick of the house, the rough texture grounding me. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. Chloe had started a war. She had chosen the time, the place, and the weapon. But she had underestimated me. She saw a quiet suburban housewife. She didn't see the woman who had spent years making life or death decisions in a chaotic ER. She didn't see a mother who would do anything to protect her son. And she certainly didn't see a wife who would not let her life's work, her family, be destroyed by a venomous whisper. I would not confront her. I would not confront David. Doing so would give them control of the narrative. It would be my word against hers, and who would our gentle, loving son Liam believe? His adoring, pregnant wife, or his suddenly hysterical mother? No, I wouldn't give her the fight she wanted. I would wait, I would watch, I would gather my evidence like a detective at a crime scene. I would play the part of the doting grandmother-to-be. I would smile, I would knit booties, I would throw her a baby shower. I would let her believe she had won. And I would wait for the one thing that could not lie, the one thing that would expose the truth, whatever it was. I would wait for the baby to be born. And then, I would get a DNA test. Standing there in the cold, dark garden, a year-long winter began in my heart. I knew the coming months would be the hardest of my life. I would have to live with this poison, this uncertainty, every single day. I would have to look at my husband and wonder if he was a traitor. I would have to look at my son and feel the pain of his inevitable heartbreak. I would have to smile at my daughter-in-law while she cultivated the lie in her womb. It was a terrifying path to choose, but it was the only one I had. Chloe had whispered her truth. Now I would wait for science to scream its own. The year that followed Chloe's whisper was a masterclass in deception. and I was its most dedicated student. My life became a stage, and I played the role of Sarah, the happy wife and expectant grandmother, with an Oscar-worthy performance. On the outside, I was a placid lake, but beneath the surface, a silent, frantic current was pulling me under. My primary subject of observation was David. I watched him the way a hawk watches a field mouse. Every word, every glance, every moment of distraction became a clue in my private investigation. The first few weeks were torture. I'd lie awake at night, staring at his sleeping form, the man I'd shared a bed with for 35 years, and see a stranger. Did he touch Chloe? Did he whisper things to her? The images my mind conjured were vivid and grotesque, acid eating away at the foundations of our life together. He became more withdrawn, but his retreat was maddeningly ambiguous. He would spend hours in his workshop in the garage, a place that had always been his sanctuary. Before, I found the sound of his sawing and sanding comforting. Now it sounded like he was building a wall between us. When I'd bring him a coffee, he'd look up, startled, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't read. Was it guilt, or was it just the stress from his architectural firm I was projecting my fears onto? "Everything okay, honey?" I'd ask, keeping my voice light. "Fine, Sarah, just a big project at work." "A lot of pressure," he'd say, turning back to his blueprints. It was a plausible explanation, a perfect alibi. Chloe, on the other hand, was anything but ambiguous. She reveled in her pregnancy and the attention it brought her, and she seemed to take a special, cruel pleasure in torturing me with subtle gestures. At family gatherings, which became more frequent, she would insist on sitting between me and David. She'd ask him to get her a glass of water, to fluff her pillow, to help her up, always with a look in my direction, a tiny, triumphant smirk on her lips. During Thanksgiving dinner, she made a toast. "To family," she said, raising her glass of sparkling cider, "and to the people who support you no matter what. David," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "thank you for being such a rock for me and Liam during this special time. Your wisdom is invaluable." I felt the eyes of the whole family on us. Liam beamed, squeezing her hand, so proud of his wife for acknowledging his father. David just nodded, a tight, uncomfortable expression on his face. I smiled, raised my glass, and took a sip of wine, the bitter taste a perfect match for the feeling in my gut. She was an artist of insinuation, painting a masterpiece of doubt for an audience of one. My only lifeline was my younger sister, Olivia. She lived 2 states away, a blessing that allowed for unfiltered, tear-filled phone calls without fear of being overheard. "You're going to make yourself sick, Sarah," she told me during one late-night call, her voice crackling with concern over the line. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, just to feel like I could breathe air that wasn't contaminated by the lie. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Liv," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I watch them, I see him looking at her belly. What am I supposed to think? What does your gut tell you? Your real gut, not the fear, the ER nurse gut that could spot a liar from 20 feet away." I thought about it, closing my eyes. My gut tells me David is a terrible liar. He can't even lie about finishing the crossword puzzle. If he was hiding something this big, he'd be a wreck. He's stressed, he's distant, but he doesn't feel guilty. He feels cornered by something. And my gut tells me Chloe is a viper. She's enjoying this is a game to her. "Then trust that," Olivia said firmly. "Hold on to that. Don't let her make you doubt your own sanity. You have a plan, stick to the plan." Sticking to the plan meant leaning into my role, and the biggest performance was yet to come, the baby shower. I insisted on hosting it. "It's my first grandchild," I announced to the family. "I want to do it right." Chloe preened, accepting as if it were her royal due. I spent weeks planning it, channeling all my anxiety into floral arrangements and catering menus. The house filled with pastel balloons and the chatter of Chloe's friends. I smiled until my face ached. I watched as she opened gifts, a mountain of tiny clothes and expensive gadgets. For every gift, she would hold it up, look at me, and smile that secret, toxic smile. The breaking point almost came when my own gift was opened. I had spent weeks knitting a beautiful soft baby blanket in a neutral yellow. It was a tradition in my family. I had made one for Liam when he was born. As Chloe pulled it from the box, she feigned awe. "Oh, Sarah, it's beautiful," she said, holding it up. Then she turned to her best friend. "It's so traditional, almost vintage." The word hung in the air, vintage, old, outdated, like me. Then she looked at David, who was standing awkwardly by the fireplace. "David, you're so good with colors. Do you think this will match the modern aesthetic we're going for in the nursery?" She was forcing his hand, forcing him to choose a side, publicly, between his wife and her. The room went quiet. Everyone was watching. David looked like a deer in headlights. He cleared his throat. "It's a beautiful blanket, Chloe," he said, his voice strained. "It was made with love. That matches any aesthetic." It was the right answer. A diplomatic answer. But in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, anger. Not at me, but at her. He saw the game she was playing. For the first time I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe he wasn't her accomplice. Maybe he was another victim. "Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and if you're finding value in my story, please take a moment to leave a like. It helps more than you know." That small moment was enough to refuel my resolve. I could get through this. Spring arrived, painting Ohio in shades of green and pink, but I barely noticed. My world was grayscale, a holding pattern of waiting. Chloe's belly swelled, a constant living reminder of the lies she was nurturing. Liam was lost in a fog of paternal excitement, talking about strollers and college funds, completely oblivious to the emotional war being waged around him. His innocence was the thing that hurt the most. He was the prize they were fighting over, and he had no idea. My research into DNA testing became my secret hobby. I learned the difference between legal tests and at-home peace-of-mind tests. I learned that you could use discrete samples, like a pacifier or a cotton swab from the cheek. I found a reputable lab online, bookmarked the page, and memorized the prices and procedures. The knowledge was my armor. It made me feel proactive, not just like a passive victim waiting for the axe to fall. As Chloe's due date in early July approached, the tension in the house became a physical presence. It sat at the dinner table with us. It watched TV with us in the evenings. David and I moved around each other with a pained, careful choreography. The easy intimacy we had shared for decades was gone, replaced by a chasm of unspoken words. I grieved for it. I grieved for the trust we had lost, regardless of the truth about the baby. Chloe's whisper had been a wrecking ball, and even if she was lying, the damage was already done. How do you rebuild a house when you can't be sure the foundation isn't riddled with cracks? One evening, about a week before the due date, I found David in the nursery. Liam had so carefully painted a soft grey. He was just standing in the middle of the room, his hand resting on the edge of the crib. He didn't hear me enter. "It's a nice crib," I said softly. He jumped, turning around. His face was etched with a weariness that went bone deep. "Sarah, I didn't hear you. Are you excited?" I asked, my voice neutral. He looked at the crib, then back at me. His eyes were pleading. Pleading for what? For me to understand. For me to ask the question that was hanging between us. "I just want Liam to be happy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's a good kid. He's going to be a great dad." It was then I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he was not the father. I didn't know what his secret was, but it wasn't infidelity. There was pain in his eyes, yes, but it was the pain of a father, not a lover. He was trapped in this drama, just as I was, though likely for different reasons. My heart didn't soar with relief, it just ached with a profound sadness for all of us. For the mess we were in, for the son we were both trying to protect. For the 35 years of trust that had been so easily poisoned. I walked over and stood beside him, placing my hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. We stood there in silence for a long time, two strangers in the wreckage of our life, looking at an empty crib that held the promise of either our salvation or our complete and utter destruction. The waiting was almost over. The final act was about to begin. The call came on a sweltering July night. The kind of Ohio night where the air is so thick with humidity, it feels like you're breathing water. The shrill ring of the phone sliced through the quiet darkness of our bedroom, and I was awake instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this was it. David fumbled for the lamp, flooding the room with soft yellow light. Liam's name was on the screen. "It's time," David said, his voice rough with sleep, and he answered. I could only hear Liam's side of the conversation as a series of excited, muffled bursts of sound. "Okay, son, slow down. Yes, we're on our way. We'll meet you there. We love you." He hung up and looked at me. Her water broke. They're heading to Riverside Methodist. In that moment, a strange, cold calm washed over me. The months of anxiety, of watching and waiting, had all been a rehearsal for this. This was the opening night. I got out of bed, my movements deliberate and steady. While David threw on clothes, I went into my bathroom and opened the vanity. Behind a stack of towels in a small, unmarked box was my kit, a set of sterile cotton swabs in sealed packaging and a small pre-labeled vial from the DNA lab's website I had bookmarked. It felt illicit, like something a spy would carry. Seeing it there, real and tangible, solidified my resolve. There was no turning back. The drive to the hospital was surreal. The city was asleep, the streets empty and slick under the orange glow of the streetlights. David drove, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The chasm between us felt wider than ever. He was nervous, but it was the nervousness of a grandfather-to-be. My nervousness was something far darker and more complex. I was on my way to meet the child who held the key to my entire future, a tiny, innocent judge and jury. We found Liam pacing the waiting room like a caged animal, his face a mess of joy and terror. "She's amazing," he said, hugging us both tightly. "She's in there, she's so strong." He was vibrating with an energy so pure and happy it was painful to watch. He was living in a beautiful, sunlit reality, while I was trapped in a dungeon of suspicion just a few feet away. The hours that followed were a blur of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and the muffled sounds of a hospital at work. We drank bitter coffee from styrofoam cups. We made small talk. I kept my performance up, playing the role of the calm, supportive mother. But inside, my mind was racing, planning. How would I get the sample? Would I have a moment alone with the baby? What if Chloe never let it out of her sight? The logistics were a tangled knot in my brain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a nurse called us back. Chloe was exhausted but radiant, propped up on a mound of pillows, and in a small, clear plastic bassinet beside her bed was the baby, a tiny, red-faced, beautiful baby boy. "Mom, Dad," Liam said, his voice thick with unshed tears of joy. "Meet Noah." I approached the bassinet, my feet feeling like lead. I looked down at the tiny, sleeping face. He had a full head of dark, downy hair and perfect rosebud lips. And in that moment, all the anger, all the suspicion, all the machinations melted away, replaced by a wave of emotion so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. This was my grandson. Regardless of the science, of the lies, of the betrayal, a part of my son was in this tiny being. I loved him instantly, and that love made what I had to do next feel 100 times more monstrous. Chloe watched me like a hawk from the bed. "Isn't he perfect, Sarah?" she asked, her voice soft, but her eyes were sharp. "He's more than perfect, Chloe," I said, my voice genuine for the first time in a year. I reached out and let him grip my finger, his tiny hand surprisingly strong. "He's absolutely beautiful." We stayed for an hour. David held him, looking clumsy and overwhelmed with emotion. Liam never stopped smiling. I held him too, breathing in that unique newborn scent, a mix of milk and powder and pure innocence. I committed every detail of his face to memory. But the opportunity I was looking for never came. Chloe's eyes were always on me, on us. She was guarding him. We finally left in the early morning, as the sun was beginning to cast a pale grey light over the city. I felt a rising tide of panic. My window of opportunity was closing. In a day or two they would be home, and getting a discreet sample would be nearly impossible. "I'm going to run back in," I said to David as we reached the car. "I think I left my sweater in the waiting room." He nodded, too tired to question it. "I'll wait in the car." I didn't go to the waiting room. My heart pounding, I went back to the maternity ward. I walked with purpose, like a nurse on a mission. I peeked around the corner of the hallway leading to Chloe's room. Through the window in her door, I could see Liam had fallen asleep in the chair, his head tilted back. Chloe was also asleep, her mouth slightly open. The nurse had just come out of the room, pushing a cart. This was my chance. It might be my only one. My hands trembled as I slipped into the quiet, dim room. The only sound was the soft beeping of a monitor and the baby's gentle breathing. I moved to the bassinet. Noah was stirring, his mouth making little sucking motions. My plan to use a pacifier was out. They didn't have one. It had to be the swab. My hands felt clumsy, alien. I took one of the sterile swabs out of its wrapper. My ER training kicked in again. Be quick, be efficient, be silent. With one swift, gentle motion, I swabbed the inside of his cheek. He barely stirred. I slipped the wet swab into the vial, sealed it, and tucked it deep into my purse. The entire act took less than 10 seconds. I backed out of the room, my blood roaring in my ears. I felt like a criminal, a grave robber. I had violated a sacred space, desecrated a moment that should have been pure. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. But the need to know the truth was stronger. I hurried back to the car, my face a neutral mask once more. The next day, I mailed the package from a post office across town, paying in cash. The lab's website said the results would be emailed in 5 to 7 business days. That week was the longest of my life. The family was buzzing with joy. Photos of baby Noah flooded our phones. Liam and Chloe brought him home. We went over to see them, and I had to hold him, to kiss his head, all while knowing what I had done, knowing the secret ticking like a time bomb in my purse, and now, in a lab hundreds of miles away. I saw the way Chloe watched me, the way she positioned herself between me and the baby. She knew, on some primal level, that I was a threat. She thought her secret was her power, but she had no idea that I was forging a weapon of my own, one forged not from whispers and lies, but from hard, cold scientific fact. The waiting, the observation, it was all over. The plan was in motion. Now all I could do was wait for the email that would either confirm my worst fears and shatter my family, or expose Chloe's lie and begin a different kind of war. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 business days after I'd mailed the sample. The subject line was chillingly mundane. "Your paternity test results are ready." For a full 10 minutes, I just stared at it. It felt like a digital envelope containing a bomb. Clicking it would change everything. No matter what it said, the life I was living, this fragile truce built on smiles and knitted blankets, would be over. My hand was shaking as I clicked the link and entered the secure password I had memorized. A PDF document loaded on the screen. It was clinical, sterile, full of legal jargon and scientific terms. My eyes scanned past it all, searching for the only part that mattered. I found it at the bottom of the first page, in a bold black box, analysis of the DNA profiles for the alleged father, David Miller, and the child, Noah last name, shows a genetic mismatch. The probability of paternity is 0%. 0%. The number pulsed on the screen. 0%. It wasn't a number, it was an acquittal. It was a release. It was an anchor cutting me loose from the year-long nightmare I'd been drowning in. A wave of relief, so powerful it buckled me over, washed through me. I dropped my head into my hands and let out a sob, a ragged, ugly sound I had been holding in for an entire year. David was innocent. My husband, my oak, had not betrayed me. The foundation of our life, of our 35 years together, was not rotten. It had been attacked, assaulted by a lie, but it was still sound. But the relief was quickly followed by a new, chilling emotion, cold, hard fury. If David wasn't the father, then Chloe's whisper hadn't been a confession of a sordid truth. It had been a calculated, malicious act of psychological warfare. She had looked me in the eye and fired a bullet, intending to kill my marriage, my peace of mind, my place in my own family. She had done it for sport, for power, to isolate me and cement her own control. She had used her own unborn child as a weapon. The sadness I had felt for her, the pity, it all evaporated, replaced by a glacial rage. She hadn't just lied, she had tried to burn my world to the ground and dance in the ashes, and I had let her. I had smiled, I had hosted her party, I had held her hand, I printed the document. The single sheet of paper felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any object I had ever held. This was the truth. Tangible, undeniable. My first instinct was to call David, to scream the good news, to apologize for the silent prison of doubt I had trapped him in. But I stopped. He was a victim here too, and so was Liam. A public explosion, a dramatic confrontation, would only cause more pain, especially for my son. Chloe wanted drama, she thrived on it. I would not give it to her. My response had to be as quiet and as devastating as her whisper had been. I called Liam. "Hi, honey. How are you and the little man doing?" "We're great, Mom," he said, his voice full of the happy exhaustion of a new dad. "Just tired. Noah was up all night." "I understand," I said, my voice calm and even. "Listen, could you, Chloe, and Noah come over for dinner tonight? Your dad and I want to see the baby. I'll make something simple." "Oh, I don't know, Mom. Chloe's really tired." "Please, Liam," I said, a new steel in my voice he wasn't used to. "It's important. We need to talk as a family." The tone in my voice must have registered, because he agreed without further protest. "Okay, Mom. We'll be there around 7. I spent the afternoon in a strange state of calm. I didn't make a fancy dinner. I just made a simple roast chicken. The storm was coming, but the eye of the hurricane was strangely peaceful. When David got home from work, I met him at the door. I didn't say anything. I just handed him the printed sheet of paper. He read it, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then his eyes widened as he scanned the page. He read it again. He looked up at me, his face a canvas of shock, relief, and dawning horror. "Sarah, what is this?" he whispered. "Why would you even—" And so for the first time I told him. I told him everything. I told him about the whisper at the dinner table a year ago. I told him about the months of watching him, of suspecting him, of the private hell I had been living in. I watched as the pain and confusion on his face morphed into a righteous anger that mirrored my own. "That's why," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's why she's been like this. That's why you've been so distant." He sank onto a chair, the paper trembling in his hand. "My God, Sarah. I thought you were falling out of love with me. I thought you had betrayed me," I said, tears finally welling in my eyes. It was the only thing that made sense. He stood up and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I am so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I am so sorry you went through that alone." In that moment, the chasm between us closed. We were a team again. When Liam and Chloe arrived, we were ready. Liam was carrying Noah in his car seat, smiling. Chloe walked in behind him, a look of weary annoyance on her face. "Smells good, Mom," Liam said, placing the car seat on the floor. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice polite but cold. David stood beside me, his expression grim. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Chloe's fake smile faltered. She looked from my face to David's, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Sit down," David said, his voice leaving no room for argument. They sat at the dining room table, the same table where the lie had been born. Liam looked confused. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer him. I looked directly at Chloe. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply slid the single sheet of paper across the polished wood of the table until it stopped directly in front of her. She looked down at it. She read the words "paternity test results." The color drained from her face. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to formulate some new manipulation, but no sound came out. The whisperer was speechless. Liam, confused, reached for the paper. "What is this?" He read it, his happy, innocent face crumpled. He read it again, his mind refusing to process the information. "I don't understand. Why would you? Mom, why would you do this?" he asked, his voice cracking, turning on me. "Because of what your wife whispered to me at this table 1 year ago," I said calmly. Ask her what she told me about who this baby's father was." Liam turned to Chloe, his eyes full of desperate confusion. "Chloe, what is she talking about?" Chloe just stared at the paper, her mask completely shattered. All the charisma, all the charm, was gone. She was just a small, terrified woman, cornered by a truth she couldn't escape. "Chloe," Liam pressed, his voice rising. Finally she looked up, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of defeat. "I had to," she whispered, her voice pathetic. "I was scared, I didn't know if he would stick around." David's voice was like ice. "Who is he, Chloe?" The whole sordid story came tumbling out. The real father was an ex-boyfriend she had a brief, regrettable fling with shortly after a fight with Liam. She got pregnant and panicked. She knew Liam would eventually want a test, or the truth would come out. So she concocted a lie so monstrous, so destructive, it would preemptively destroy anyone who could challenge her. She didn't whisper it to hurt just me. She whispered it to hurt me and David, to drive a wedge so deep into the heart of the family that if the real truth ever came out, we'd all be too broken to fight back. She would be the victim, the poor woman driven to lie by her evil in-laws. It was a scorched earth policy. I looked at my son. His face was a stoic, white mask of shock and betrayal. He wasn't crying, he was just broken. The sunlit world he had been living in had been revealed as a cardboard cutout, and he had just walked straight through it into my dark reality. He stood up, his movements stiff. Isaac's was a stoic, white mask of shock. He picked up the car seat with his sleeping, innocent son inside. He didn't look at Chloe. He didn't look at us. "I need to go," he said, his voice hollow. And he walked out the door. Chloe scrambled to follow him, but David stood up, blocking her path. "You have done enough damage, Chloe," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You are not welcome in this house again." She looked at him, then at me, her face contorted with hate. Then she turned and ran out of the house, into the night. The silence she left behind was deafening. David and I stood in the dining room, the smell of the untouched roast chicken hanging in the air. We had the truth, we had won. But it felt nothing like a victory. My son's heart was shattered, a beautiful baby boy was caught in the middle. Our family was in ruins. The whisper was silenced. But the echo would last a very, very long time. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy. It would be a slow, painful process of healing wounds we never should have received. But as David took my hand, his grip firm and steady once more, I knew we would do it. Together, we had survived the winter. Now we had to learn how to live in the spring.